as we all know, we are regulated by law by actually tomorrow, or the 31st, but since 31st is Saturday, to have our May update approved by the Board of Education. So this is the second time throughout the year that we make an update to our forecast. If you remember back in November when we passed the original forecast, we were looking at a deficit spend of about $2.9 million. And we were looking at, if you look at any cash balance with levies, which is that third or fourth section on the graph here, in 2029 we're looking at a deficit of about $3.5 million, which we know by law is not allowable. You cannot have a negative cash balance in the state of Ohio. So now we're looking at a deficit spend of about $1.2 million. And if you remember from my May update, at the end of April, we were actually thinking we were going to have a positive value. However, we have some career tech grants that we need to secure the cash for, that we won't get paid back from the state until after the end of the fiscal year. So we have to make an advance to ourselves on that. So once that money comes in, we'll get it back in from the state. So it's really just a timing issue. We're still trending to be not deficit spending, but by the way that we do cash-based accruals, we're going to have a negative deficit for the year.
Mr. Ray, what's the amount of that grant?
The total amount, just over $2 million. But
okay.
we're advancing about 1.9 of it.
Okay.
To hold on to it, just so we have it, because we have bills that will come up that we have to be able to pay that are after the fiscal year.
Okay.
So that being said, looking kind of at the summary, and I'll explain how we got here. We're actually looking at a positive cash balance now in 2029 of about $9.7 million. So that's about a $12.5 million swing.
It's impressive.
So with that, just as a reminder, we get 68% of our revenue from our local tax base. 22% comes in the form of state funding. That's a combination of the Fair School Funding Plan as well as our reimbursements on the homestead and rollback that we get from the state of Ohio. And then all of our other revenue accounts for about $10 million. Or $10 million. So it is about $10 million, but it's about 10%, actually $11 million. So key revenue assumptions that I've made in our forecast, our collection rates will remain in line with our historical rates of about 99%. In 2027, when we have the triennial update, we're expecting the valuations to continue to normalize, and we've seen data from the state of Ohio that is trending that way, that we would see that. So we're expecting Class 1 to go up by about 10.38, which is down from about 15% from the reappraisals that we just had. And our Class 2, will go up about 0.72%, which is in line with historical rate changes during the triennial update. We'll continue to see about $8.5 million a year in new construction revenue, or valuation, We'll see Class 2 valuation of a reduction of about $1.5 million. That comes in the form of businesses being taken, maybe being torn down after they're sold, or TIFs and other agreements that would cause tax abatements in Class 2. Our PUP valuations, we're expecting about a $2 million a year valuation increase year over year, and that's when they're doing increases or improvements to the energy lines that we see, so it creates about a $2 million a year valuation increase. We are assuming state funding will see a continued phase-in, however, without a base cost adjustment. So we would stay base cost at 2022, wouldn't see an increase in that, and we would see the continued phase-in potentially on the Fair School Funding Plan. It also assumes our interest income will be $2 million in 26, $1.6 million in 27, $1.6 million in 28, and $1.5 million in 29. We expect the rates to kind of continue to decrease over time, and as well as our cash balance decreases, obviously we can't earn as much interest income when we don't have the ability to invest it. So when we look at this, we're looking at our annual revenue kind of remaining kind of flat over the next 4 years after this year. we did see an increase of about 3.78% this current year in comparison to last year. Again, some of that's because of the inside village increase that we received because of the reappraisal. A big portion of that too is because we're still seeing higher interest income than we had seen previously. And we actually did better than we were projecting last year on our interest income. So what I have here for the board is kind of the breakdown in revenue in the top chart. Those are the values that we're assuming. So those show you what we're expecting in the income tax, tangible personal property tax, our unrestricted form of state aid, which is about 15.3 going up to about $16 million. Our restricted aid dropping corresponding on that, and that's just the way that they continue to phase in the fair school funding. Our local property tax reimbursements, which I gave is the homestead and rollback reimbursement that we get from the state, which is a tax credit that you see on your tax bill, as well as our other income kind of staying steady. And then you can see that advance in 26 because we're advancing out at an expense this year of the 2.1. So that's kind of, so we're gonna get the money back is what I'm saying. So that money, the reason why we're technically deficit spending isn't really truly a timing issue because we won't get the money back from the state until the next fiscal year. So if you're looking at here, I have this kind of in here just to kind of show everybody where if you see a large number increase or you see a large red number to try to explain that. Again, you see it right here in 24 and 25 in property tax, right? We were expecting more money to come in at 24. It was a timing issue. It was a tax split. People paid more on the second half of the collection, so we saw it come in. And then you see an increase there again because of the reappraisal. Not all the 2.7 is because of the reappraisal. Again, it's because we were short in 2024 and we've got the rest of that tax money in 2025 because we have a 99% tax collection rate. You see in the form of restricted aid here in 2025, we have a $531,000 higher than the year before. Well, that's because we got our science and reading reimbursements that we didn't expect to get coming through that was signed into law. We see a drop of 1.2. Well, 531,000, that's because this is no longer there. And then it's really a difference of $700,000. But lo and behold, look, we're higher $700,000 than the aid and above. So it's really kind of a wash. So just to, just if you're looking through this and we're looking for numbers, all of the revenue is down $2 million. And that's because we're expecting our interest income to drop from about $3.9 million this year to $2 million next year. So that's what explains that big drop here of $1.9 million. But if the interest rates don't really change much, again, remember, we can only invest in very safe, liquid securities. We don't invest in the stock market. We don't invest in Bitcoin. We have laws and policy that dictate in what we can invest in. So as the high yield interest rates are up, but they're coming down. I just got to notice again from a high yield interest savings account that I have in my personal life, it dropped again, right? Because things, as the market continues to stabilize and you're seeing higher interest earnings there, our rates go down because less people are investing in safe, liquid securities. So kind of going through that. Again, that advance in, because we have the advance out that caused that deficit spend, is obviously not going to be there next year. So it's going to go back down to what we were historically seeing. So I'd just like to explain those to everybody. I think just a kind of a check on our assumptions. Are we in line? And I'd say we're making fair assumptions. Our historical annual revenue change in the prior 5 years was about 1.19. I'm expecting a 0.76% increase. Again, not really that far off, so I think we're trying to stay in line with that. So if that was really, really off and it was like 0% versus 1.19, the Citizens Financial Advisory Committee would probably not be very careful with those types of assumptions. So we try to keep those as close as possible. When we look at transitioning to our expenses, we look at our enrollment. Again, we've talked about this a lot since 2000. you know, I've shown the graphs with our enrollment has been on a decline since 2000 or even prior to that. Our decline continues. We are starting to see a leveling off, and we're projecting on live birth rates for that to kind of continue to kind of be more of a level, slight increase up, but again, I would expect that to be relatively.
Phil, is that, so we haven't seen the leveling off yet. That would be effective for next year. We're anticipating kind of leveling.
Correct.
There.
A leveling, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because I know in Craig's update, it looked like the kindergarten numbers were so small in some of the schools. Is that because
They
people
wait
just don't
forever.
register
They
until?
haven't registered yet.
Yeah.
They-
Okay,
they do
because
it-
I was
Yeah,
like,
I never-
last
they do
year.
it
I'm like,
now.
oh yeah, it's so like.
People do it at the last
Wild.
minute, yeah.
Or they think they
buses
can't
start
until the
running and
summer,
they're like,
yeah.
oh, I should register.
Where are they? Yeah, okay. And how is it, that's just based on like a data?
Based on, yeah, it's
software
based on our
for
historical,
live
yeah,
birth
analytics, yeah, correct. So it's based on the analytics of, first and foremost, live birth rates, but also based on what we've seen from live birth rates on typical enrollment.
Right. And it's been pretty accurate the last few years, right?
Yeah.
Compared to, 'cause, I mean,
We're actually higher than I was projecting last year when I looked at it. We actually have more kids than I was even thinking we would. Based on,
this year or next
Yeah,
year?
for this year. So, obviously we look at enrollment because we have, that drives our
Right,
expenses,
that's why
right?
I'm-
Because,
yeah.
and I still have not gotten my graph updated that shows that our enrollment and our staffing are in
the
alignment.
alligator,
Yeah.
old alligator chart, that's
Yeah.
probably not.
So, waiting on the state to release that so we can put that in. So, kind of moving forward, no surprise at all. 83% of our budget goes to salaries and benefits. 10% goes to purchase services, which is our third largest expense, and then kind of supplies, capital, we don't have debt, and other operating expenses account for the other 7%.
Bill,
I think-
sorry, I have another question.
Yep, go ahead.
Do you ever break it down for personnel cost per like exempt, classified and admin, and just so we could see out of that 83% who has the most?
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely do that.
Be helpful just to see.
I'll put that not in this Friday's update, but next Friday.
Thank you.
But as we can imagine, the teachers, certified staff will be the biggest portion of that, then classified and exempt, and then admin, just based on numbers.
And those would be only for, because I remember we talked about how there was a discrepancy with the admin reporting in the CUP report.
Okay.
What was it was exempt admin, and then what was the other?
Classified and certified.
So there's no other.
There's
So
no
it was,
other.
some of those folks should have been under exempt.
Some of our exempt people were showing up as admin,
Okay.
but we've corrected that in our EMIS reporting. Yep, reclassified them as into the category that they are, because they're not administrators. So, kind of where the rubber meets the road here, what are my assumptions for our expenses to get us to where we saw that turnaround of $12.5 million? We are assuming 3% in each of the 3 years for the collective bargaining unit. Our spousal coordination of benefits changes are included. We're assuming those to be about $2 million. Our X changes about $750,000. We've included the adjusted severance for the certified staff from the collective bargaining agreement, as well as the supplemental changes. So you can actually change the tentative agreement with MCE to an actual approved contract, but obviously I couldn't make that assumption when I made my presentation because you guys hadn't voted yet. So all of the things that we have in the MCE and MTA contract are included in the current forecast that you have in front of you, just to be clear. It has assumptions of reduced certified staffing of 12 teachers going into 2026, 8 teachers in 2027, or not necessarily teachers, 8 certified staff in 2027, 3 certified staff in 2028, and 2 certified staff in 2029. It has the inclusion of the school, at the time when I did this, known as safety officers, of 4 going into next school year, 2 into 27, and 2 into 28. It has the reduction of classified staff going down an account clerk and a library assistant in 2026. It It has the addition of a preschool classroom assistant and a reclassification of a secretary 3 in transportation to another dispatcher. It has the reduction of 2 administrative positions in 2026. It has the reduction of 1 exempt position in 2026. And we modeled the budget reductions of the best that we could for 26 through 29, based on the discussions that Mr. Heath and his team have had with, continuing to control the budget moving forward. And I did drop the insurance rate increase from 7% to 6.5% based on some of the changes that we've made. Not a huge percentage difference, but it does have obviously a savings. So with this, I show you guys this because this is the visual representation of the data that we have. And I think this is where, if you're not a numbers person, that this is where the board can check and look for abnormalities to make sure that I didn't make any crazy assumptions where something's drastically less or drastically higher, and so-called padding the numbers, so to speak. As you can see, everything is in a line with historical trends and kind of the assumptions that I just read to you. The only thing that looks like an anomaly to me on that, and I think we should all know why, is the big purple section in 2023 of the $14.1 million that we transferred from the general fund to the 070 capital improvement fund. So again, we've been doing that all along. It's something that a lot of districts are considering and talking about now. And Mr. Wilson had started that prior to my arrival, and we have continued it because we believe it's just good practice, because that money is already accounted for. And we won't see another transfer again until 2029. We've actually stretched that out. If you remember, it was only supposed to last a handful of years, but because of the cuts that we made after the PI levy failed, we're able to stretch out that transfer even longer to just meet the needs of the improvements that we're doing on routes and parking lots and the construction that we have going on. So when you look at historical expense increases versus our projected, we're about 1% higher moving out. And again, that's based on the assumptions that we made. And I just would like to point out that 2.38 is below what the CPI inflationary increase was during that same time period. It was over 4% during that time. So we actually were able to flatten that expense curve from a systematic standpoint on the decisions that we were making in the cuts that we made. We're constantly looking for ways to reduce that, and I would expect as we get into reality that 3.35% is actually lower too, because there's still cuts that we're going to continue to make, as we'll talk about here shortly. But again, just wanted the board and the community to have that information. Again, nothing that's out of the ordinary with what we're seeing. There, again, trying to justify that the assumptions that we're making are pretty realistic. Again, the data for each of the respective areas is on that chart in front of you at the top, and then the year-over-year change is below. And you can see, for example, like we talk about the operating transfers. In 2023, it went up by 7.75. Well, it's because it was $14 million, and then you see a drop of $10 million the following year, again, because we just didn't make the transfer. So nothing there out of the ordinary, and we can explain the personal service increases based on where we have our assumptions, as well as the health benefits and so on and so forth. Again, that advance out, if you see 5.02 is that 1.9 of it's because of the career tech grant. So you see it's at $2 million, and it comes down to by 1.9 million in 2026. So that second to last line, you see that big $1.9 million red number. And again, it's because we're only doing it in 2025 because of the grant. Nothing else there that really I touched on with CFA, so I'll keep moving forward. I think it's important to point out to the board and the community, the daily cost to educate a student in Mentor schools is $96. So for 7.5 hours at $96, I think that's a pretty good return on investment based on a 180 school day year. So, kind of looking at a summary standpoint, again, I think visuals are always best to explain this to the board and to the community. Our revenue is in blue, our expenses are in orange. You can see that in 2025, we're actually, right again, close to not deficit spending as we talked about. All that will come out in the wash when we meet again in June 27th. And we'll see exactly where that is once we close the fiscal year out. 2026, again, we're pretty close, and then you start to see it kind of change as we go off because our assumptions become less controllable, right, as you kind of go out from that standpoint. And what happens then with our cash balance, you can see it goes from just about $50 million down to right around $10 million by the end of the forecast. But it is positive now rather than negative. I won't go into a whole lot of detail on this. We talked about this last time we met. This is just, again, to model. The blue line is what I'm presenting here today for the May forecast with all the assumptions. The second line, that dark gray line, is the governor's model, so that's the reduction of the guarantee. The third line, if you're looking at 2027, as the reference year, that third light gray line is our November forecast. The black and the red lines are House Bill 96. And then the red line of House Bill 96 assumes that the guarantees would be reduced in 28 and 29. So basically House Bill 96, which would have the 30% cap, as well as depending upon where the governor's guarantee reductions would put us basically back where we're at in November from where we are now assumption. So again, those lines are assuming the May forecast with those changes in the proposals, just to be clear. Kind of going back, kind of getting into the revenue discussion, because I know this is something that is on the forefront of our minds, that we've talked about a number of times. We had the special meeting back in January. In November, we were kind of trending on this, again, kind of showing in days cash in hand. And you can see, I think it's worthwhile pointing out here, if you look at 23, 24, and 25, the fact that all of those numbers of days of cash on hand have really kind of stayed the same goes to the fact that Mr. Heath and his team at the Board of Education have been really focused on reducing our expense growth without compromising the educational programming at the district by making tough decisions and making cuts. And this was November. So now in May, the good thing is 25 is in the green, 26 is pretty much in the green, 27 is in the yellow, we're in that pink, and then we're in the red in 29, but kind of comparing that back, everything's kind of been shifted up. So if you compare November to May, all of our points have shifted up in that graph, which is good, right? It's what we wanted to do. And that's what we promised the board and the community we would do when we were talking about this levy kind of discussion, that this couldn't just be an ask for additional revenue. It had to be a concerted effort and reduction of expenses to make sure that we could ask for something that would then last for at least 5 years. Because we're on a 10-year levy cycle right now. So, again, now in May, you see that 23 through 26 are kind of in that same range. Start to see that decline kind of moving out in those out years, the later years of the forecast. We have a minimum general fund cash balance that can't fall below 15%. That's a little bit lower because when you look at cash days on hand, our rule of thumb as a profession is about 90 days. Once you fall below 90 days cash on hand is when you should probably really start to consider that you're putting some stress on your budget and your kind of where you're at. Ours is 15%, which equates to about 55 days of cash on hand. So I have added that, which I typically just talk about 15%, but I wanted to relate it to a number that we can, 55 days of cash on hand. Plus we have the 5% set aside for the budget reserve, which is 5% of the prior year's revenue, which is about $5.7 million. So we've shown this quite a bit. This takes our forecast from November and kind of extends it out into 30 and 31, just based on our historical trends. And again, you can just see, obviously, the deficit continues to grow, and it, you know, by 31 in November, we were looking at like a negative $60 million almost. I pointed this out in the Citizen Financial Advisory. Again, if we were to put a levy on in calendar year 25, our low one would be 4.2, 5.26, and 26, you know, this was assuming no reductions, right? So if you remember, this is all prior to our January discussion. We were looking at 5.26 to 6.83. If you waited to 27, you were looking at 6.8 to almost 8 mils at that time. Well, now, because of the savings that we've made, again, we're positive in 29, and we've reduced that negative 60 million to about $34.6 million. So you can see corresponding, again, these are just guide rails to kind of give us ideas, right? These aren't like set in stone saying that you should do one or the other, but they've reduced. So the ask that we can have can be reduced, or the timing can be changed. So we talked about in January, if you remember, kind of gave two options. I said we can go in 2025 for 5.9 mils, or we can go in 26 for 5.9 mils. And if we do that, though, we got to reduce $2 million from like basically next year through 2030. So over the next 5 years. So this chart looks probably slightly familiar. I've added some new colors just to point out a few things. Our total expenditures now in the May forecast are in this line, and they've changed. But remember we were right here in this like turquoise number. So the reason why 25, 26, and 27 are in green is because we've met that goal. So we set the goal of reducing by $2 million. We came up with these values. So these values didn't change because this is what I told you in January. Because remember I said everyone's got to hold us accountable. Like remember, it's all of us together so that we have goals that we can meet. We've met those goals through 27. We still have some work to do 28, 29, and 30. And we know that, and I think it's a matter of something that we will easily accomplish with the continued reductions that we have in mind. And I think a lot of it goes to how, when I try to adjust the budget increases that we're doing in the outer years, it gets a little bit less accurate in how I can model those reductions. But the reality is we'll keep putting these numbers up here for the board and the community so that we know those aren't going to change because those are the numbers that we set. So the goal is for us to get that first line, the total expenditure line, to make sure it mirrors in each of those years. Because if we do, and this is again to pass it in calendar year 26, so this would be next March and or next November, not this November. So this is calendar year 26. So that's why you don't see the first collection, remember, until half collection in 27, the full collection is coming in 28, it's about $16 million, just as a reminder. And then the good thing about that is if we hit our numbers, we're positive in 27 when we get our first half collection, positive 28, positive 29, positive in 30, slight, not really, you know, $340,000 on $131 million can easily be erased. And then 2032, that's probably when we gotta start talking about another levy again. That means we're gonna get about another 5 to 6 years then out of that levy.
Question, so does that account for 2 million reduction every year beyond?
It's hitting our 2 million reductions here through 2030. So we still have some work to do here, right?
Gotcha.
But it's assuming that we get to these numbers.
Okay, okay.
Again, because we've always said that this can't just be an ask for additional revenue. It has to be a continued tightening of our budget. And I also did it for 2025, just to show you what that would look like if the board, you know, because we did talk about the consideration of doing it in 2025. I know there was some hesitation because, you know, just with the elections going on and everything else, we weren't really sure if it would be the right timing, but again, that's a decision that it's yours to make. If you do it in 2025, first collection then comes in 26 in our spring collection, we get 8 million. And then the increase in 27, kind of, it's the same, it's still the same amount, it's 5.9 mils. So we're positive then in 26, positive in 27, positive 28, positive 29, positive in 30, negative 31. So the time frame kind of becomes the same. And this is if we did nothing, didn't make any changes. And this is if we just did 1 million, or went back to like $1 million. So, you could do it sooner. It's going to potentially put us in a better financial position because we'd have the revenue. But I think it's just a matter of timing.
Bill, what does the, so for MTA, MC, when you get to those years where the contract will run out, what are we what is included?
Oh, yeah.
Is it 1%?
1.5%.
Okay.
Yeah, 1.5%. Yeah, so
Thank you.
After, good question, 26, 27, 28,
Yeah.
or 3%, then it goes, everyone's back to 1.5%.
Okay,
That's with no change in healthcare.
right.
Correct. And no further changes in healthcare
Right.
either, yeah. And then assuming 7% in those out years as well.
Okay.
It assumes that we get the low end again
Right, of the two.
on our healthcare savings, and then the severance is the worst, which we know is not gonna be the
Right.
case because the majority of the staff don't have the max number of days. And not everybody's gonna leave that when they could get the advantage the first year because they just aren't ready to leave or
Sure.
they can't leave. So in summary, we reduced our deficit spend in each of the out years, which is good. That's what we wanted to see. We met our goals for 26 and 27. We still need to do work in 28 through 30. We know that, we recognize that, we communicate that out. Again, that second line, that turquoise line, teal line, or the lighter blue of the blues that I used, will be our measuring stick for that as we continue to move forward. So the board that's here, and then that comes in, if it changes in November, should make sure that they check us on that, as we will continue to check ourselves against that. We continue to deficit spend, and our cash balance is depleting yearly. We will fall below the minimum standard 90 days reserves in 27, and we will be below the general fund operating budget policy limit after 28. So we have a policy that says we can't fall below, 55 days.
I have one question, Bill.
Mhm.
This is based on the legislation that's swirling around the budget, how that's gonna play out. If they would not fund the fair school funding and put the cap on and so on, do you anticipate a flurry of levy activity across the district because everybody's gonna be in a hurting position?
Yeah, I think what you're gonna see across the state would be more frequent, smaller levies. Yeah.
How many?
Which is gonna create voter fatigue, which is my
Sure.
biggest concern, because, and then the other concerns too, like with the cap, and we talked about this a little bit, is you're gonna see a one-time savings as a taxpayer, and then in Mentor, the next exact year, when we're below 30%, your taxes are gonna go back up. And they're gonna think
Well-
that we raised their taxes.
And that's if schools give the money back, because I know there's talk about why give it back if you could spend it on other things.
Yeah, I mean, we've
So
heard
there's-
legislators actually suggest to us, that we should move it.
Yeah,
Too, which is kind of like, to me, it's like,
yeah,
Like-
that was the issue I had with
Yeah, it
the
doesn't
cap,
make
is I
sense.
feel like it's gonna lead more
Yeah.
to that.
so, the bottom line is we need to continue to make reductions. We've partially met our goal, which I think is great. And then, my recommendation is that we could wait at the latest heading into fiscal year 26. It's just the board want to pull the trigger in the fall, which means we'd have to make a decision by, Merck says 2 votes. So we have like an early August deadline, so you'd have to have something, a July meeting, then a special meeting before the end of July to do that. So time's getting tight on that decision if it's a consideration. Or do you want to wait until spring of calendar year 26 and then if it passes, you're good. If it fails, we'll have to make decisions, and then you have one more bite at the apple in 26 to do it in November, because then if it doesn't fail, then we're really like saying this is what's gonna happen. Because you would have to then make cuts, because then we start to get into the fiscal watch and
Yeah.
fiscal emergency and things like that, and then kind of go down that road. But again, this is assuming reductions in administration and reductions in certified staff, reductions in classified staff, without impacting current programming. So we presented this in the assumptions to the Citizens Financial Advisory last Thursday, with the assumptions on MTA and knowing that the TA for MCE was included. We didn't get into details with them on what that included because of the fact that it was not approved by the board. But they were in agreement and have approved this for the board's consideration last Thursday. And happy to answer any questions.